They called it cursed land, where even the wind refused to stay. But one morning, under the pale light of dawn, a weary veteran and his loyal German shepherd walked into Dry Creek, and everything changed. He bought that dying ranch for just $10, the kind of deal people laugh at and walk away from. Yet, what if that broken barn was hiding something more powerful than gold? Something that could bring life back to a town that had already given up on hope. This is the story of Ethan and Rex, a man who'd lost his faith and a dog who helped him find it again. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments, and if you still believe that loyalty can heal what life has broken, hit subscribe and stay with us till the end. Winter thinned the world to bone, a pewter sky, a wind that filed the edges of every sound, a pale sun that kept its distance, as if faith had to be proved before warmth was granted. Ethan Miller looked built to outlast weather and worry. Tall and rangy, the weight of him ran in the shoulders, not the waist. A sun-bleached field coat hung straight over a frame that still remembered inspections at dawn. A close beard, brown cut with silver, framed a jaw too stubborn for fashion. Wind-brown skin showed an old nick at the left temple, the kind a medic once closed in a hurry. His eyes were steel gray, workman's eyes, not cruel, not soft, just tuned for weak joints and quiet threats. A faint hitch marked his left step, an old line-of-duty injury that never asked pity and never got it. His hands were clean, scar-knuckled, the hands of a man who can set a nail true and knows when to leave wood alone. Before he was a drifter, he had worked deserts different from this one, 2 deployments, convoy security, and base perimeter. The war had taught him useful smallness, count exits without thinking, keep to the edges of rooms, let silence speak first. Since coming home, the small things remained. They were how you got through a day without falling through it. Rex trotted at his side, 5 years old and fully himself, a German shepherd wearing a sable coat that flickered from bronze to black whenever light remembered what it could do. Ears pricked, weight centered, he moved with the effortless precision of old K9 drills. A pale scar stitched his right forepaw like a white thread. When sharp noises cracked the air, Rex slid his shoulder into Ethan's shin. No performance, just a partner's habit. The wordless here and now of 2 creatures who had learned to live by touch. They owned little and carried less. A frayed duffel, a dented canteen, and a folded photograph Ethan couldn't open without the day breaking in the wrong direction. The wind freshened, his cheeks stung. He cut across Maine and shouldered into the post office for warmth and a quiet minute. That was all, no plan beyond getting out of the weather, until the notice board caught his eye. Property auction, Henderson Ranch, abandoned, minimum bid, $10. $10 wasn't a plan. It was a door cracked open by chance, 4 walls and a roof before the next hard night. A place to sleep that didn't move when he did. If the land felt wrong, he could leave in the morning. If it held, winter might not win. At the threshold, he steadied his breath. 4 in, hold, 4 out, hold, letting the tight band in his chest unlatch. Not ritual, not drama, just how a man tells his body we choose now. He turned the handle and went in. Ink and old paper lived here, and the steady human scrape of ledgers against wood. A few locals lingered, faces carved by sun and short harvests, brims softened to suede. Behind the counter stood Sarah Whitfield, mid-40s, tall and spare, wheat blonde, hair pulled into a practical knot, hazel eyes that measured without meanness. Her movements had the thrift of someone who disliked waste in all its forms. "You here for the Henderson lot?" she asked. "If it's still available," Ethan said. "It's been available long enough to become habit." She drew the ledger closer. 3 owners, 1 vanished, 1 swore a fire started itself, and Henderson, we found him half sunk by his well. Some nights folks swear the floorboards hum like water praying too loud. The word fire snagged his breath. The coins he set down clicked too sharp on wood. Metal on metal, a door slam from another life. Rex's shoulder pressed into his shin. The room steadied around that small weight. People say a lot when they're short on rain, Ethan said. Maybe the land's only waiting for someone who won't run. Name? Ethan Miller. Sarah wrote it in a hand that spelled names right, because names deserve that much. She stamped a provisional deed and said the county would record it by week's end. Her glance landed on Rex, calm, present. Good dog, she said, not as praise but as a judgment well considered. They stepped back into the wind. Across the street, a well-dressed man in a dark riding coat watched without pretending otherwise. The stillness of ownership, not curiosity. When Ethan met his eyes, the man turned away. Distance measured, problem deferred. Ethan filed the fact. Rex flicked an ear, as if to say, seen and noted. South of town, the road unrolled like a frayed ribbon. Dry grass leaned as if listening. A buzzard wrote a brief sentence across the sky and erased itself. Rex worked a loose circle, range, check, return, keeping Ethan centered in the quiet geometry of care that felt less like protection than belonging. A loose sign slapped a wall. The sharp clap went through Ethan like a thrown stone. He named 5 things he could see, 4 he could feel, 3 he could hear. The present brightened at the edges. With me? His look asked. Rex's tail tipped once. With you. The Henderson place showed itself by what still asked to be mended. Fence posts leaned at the angles of tired men. A windmill stood rust-locked mid-turn, an unfinished sentence against the sky. The barn didn't quite stand straight, as if someone had spoken to it sharply years ago, and it had never recovered its pride. Yet the boards, gray as driftwood, kept their grain, honest bone under weather. $10 wasn't a bargain, it was a bet. First on shelter, then on the chance to begin again if the place held. Ethan let the land look him over. He offered neither pity nor disdain, just a craftsman's nod at a job larger than the tools, but worth starting anyway. Home, he said, testing a word he hadn't trusted in a long time. Rex gave one firm thump of his tail, an arrow to the barn's back wall, where winter light slid through spaced planks like a narrow ladder. Inside smelled of straw and oil and mouse, dry wood warmed by thin sun, and something cooler braided beneath. An echo of water the air had not entirely forgotten. Ethan walked the perimeter, habit on habit, counting posts, noting sag, memorizing where collapse might try to begin. Near the rear wall, his fingertips found shallow grooves. He brushed, dust lifted in a soft sigh, and left deliberate lines behind. Triangles linked by diagonal strokes, his grandfather's watermarks. Heat climbed the back of his neck. He set his palm to the floorboards and felt it. At first only cold, then the faintest resilience. A small, patient push from below, as if the skin of the world took a careful breath under his hand. Could be nothing, he said into the hush. Could be everything. Rex gave a single taut chuff, the sound he made when noise resolved into signal. Ethan breathed out, and something in him unhooked with the breath. Not relief exactly, more like consent. Not cursed, he whispered. Buried? Dusk swallowed color from the hills. On a distant rise, a horse and rider stitched briefly out of the horizon, the posture of a man used to being obeyed by land and people alike, then slid back behind the ridge. Rex watched until absence returned to being absence, then settled shoulder to Ethan's boot, the kind of nearness that turns a night into a room you can sleep in. Ethan built a small, safe fire and fed Rex, then himself. Ordinary rituals that, done in order, felt like remembering how to live. He did not unfold the photograph. Keeping it closed was its own kind of honor. Above, 3 cold stars found the roof's broken geometry. Below, the hush went on, water speaking patient grammar into wood and dust. and a man who had decided, for tonight, to stay. He had paid $10 for a rumor. What he'd bought, he understood, as his eyes dimmed with the last coal, was the right to remain long enough to turn rumor into proof. Morning slid in thin and colorless. Winter light poured through gauze. The ranch met it like a tired body, slow, wary, willing. Ethan ate standing, a heel of bread, some jerky. Rex drifted at his side in an easy patrol that looked casual and wasn't. Outside, honesty was the only promise. Fence posts shouldered together like men at closing time, green-black rot at the bases. The windmill hung frozen where the last breeze quit. A half-collapsed well frame out front wore a fur of gray lichen. Beyond, mesquite chopped the wind into smaller troubles. Inside the barn, light made ladders out of dust. Old wood answered with long, tired creaks. Useful sounds, telling a man where weight could and could not go. He'd left his bedroll by the stall wall, a coffee tin where a square of sun would find it. Small order, steady mind. From the lean-to, he pulled 2 straight boards, braced a sagging post, cinched it with baling wire. The roof complained less, half a note toward gratitude. Rex completed a quiet circle and stopped, as if he'd hit a wire no one else could see. Ears clicked up, not theatrical, professional. A low sound thudded once in his chest. He looked at Ethan, then at the rear sill where a blade of light slipped through the planks. Ethan crouched and brushed with his glove. A cataract of dust ran down. Under it, a triangle cut with a diagonal slash, like a small mountain given a path. 6 inches over, another. A third at ankle height. Years of grime had muted a quick, sure hand. He scraped gently with the dull spine of his knife. Lift, don't cut. Until the pattern showed its bones, where rear post met sill. Dry, tight wood. No rot. He rested his palm on the floorboards. Cold. Then, in the still between 2 breaths, a hush under the hush. Not sound, suggestion. The way a man senses a river in the air before he hears it. Higher, more marks, triangles linked by diagonal strokes. Repeating, not identical. The tiny variance of a human wrist. He didn't rush a solution. Measure twice, move once. Old training lived easily with older summers beside a grandfather who mapped with stakes and chain. He penciled the wall, A, B, C, then sketched a quick key on an envelope back. Triangle, /Doricksteins flow. Doubled stroke, toius pressure, diagonal right, onius bearing east of true. He couldn't be sure the carver used his grandfather's code, but the language felt close enough to trust as a start. The floor twitched. It was small. A man listening to his mind might miss it. Ethan listened to the world first. A brief tremor ran along the joists. Like a shrug, a giant tried to hide. Rex braced and gave 1 bark, short, controlled. The note he used when a door on patrol thunked shut with the wrong rhythm. A strap pulled behind Ethan's ribs. Breath shortened. The barn narrowed by an inch. Triggers don't ask permission. They arrive with their arithmetic done. He set his palm to plank, squared his breath. 4 in, hold, 4 out, hold. The count did its job. The air fit back into shape. Rex slid his shoulder against Ethan's shin. Warm, steady weight. Dog, dust, old hay. Here and now. The strap eased. The tremor passed. Good, Ethan said, to the dog, the building, the day. He inventoried his scene like a carpenter counts tools. Sound, wind combing grass, wood easing. Smell, dust, mouse, a cool mineral thread. Sight, marks in series, a nail head proud of the sill by a 16th. The world returned to scale. He fetched twine, a bent nail, a chalk nub hard as a seed. Tied the nail, made a plumb, let it hang from the highest mark. Chalked where it met the floor. Walked a boot length, chalked the next. Wall language became a floor map. No chain or transit? Fine. Consistent stride and a steady eye go far. A man raised on small facts seldom needs shiny tools to learn first truths. Behind the barn, beneath a cottonwood sheared by lightning long ago, he found a rusted wheelbarrow and the mouth of a shallow trench, begun and abandoned. Soil darkened toward black. The iron smell clearer. His boot print held a wet edge longer than wind allowed. Rex tasted the air and sneezed twice, surprised by that cool thread of scent. On the slope beyond the corral, a rider paused where mesquite thinned. Same shoulders as the man in town. Coat dark, straight. He sat his horse with the stillness of money. A second figure hung back, scarecrow thin, hat brim like a saw blade. They didn't approach. Ethan didn't wave. He staked the fact in his mind and returned to the work that would outlast watchers. Back inside, plumb to mark, chalk to floor, the shape grew itself, a slow spiral from wall toward the center bay, as if the hand that carved meant for a stranger to read it years later. A figure cut the doorway light and stepped in. A woman a little above average height, spare without being thin, in practical denim and a wool coat mended at both elbows. Brown felt hat, brim softened by weather, tin lunch pail in hand, gray eyes with a tidy ledger behind them. Violet McCall, feed store bookkeeper on weekdays, the pastor's daughter on Sundays, kind without meekness, chestnut hair pinned without fuss, 2 wisps escaped at the temples. Sun had warmed her cheekbones the color of well-oiled saddle leather. "Sarah sent this," she said, lifting the pail. "Bread and molasses. She figured you'd work through lunch and pretend you hadn't." Dry humor, never cutting. Rex gave a low woof, greeting, not warning. Violet's mouth tipped at one corner. Handsome dog. Not the kind that's vain about it. "If he knows anything, he doesn't say," Ethan said, taking the pail. "Real food changes a day's angle." "McCall?" "Violet. I keep Whitman's books, help Sarah when she's drowning. My father says we live on sufferance and rain. We're short on the second." She leaned toward the wall. "Writing?" "Marks," Ethan said, and left it there. Her eyes did a quick up down, the mind that likes to understand, and then set, wanting aside for courtesy. "If you hear the floor hum at 2 a.m., she said lightly, "don't open the door. Only advice I have for owners of Henderson's trouble." She paused at the threshold. "Harlan's riders came by twice. I saw. You'll see them again." She tipped her hat to Rex. "Be good to him," she told the dog. "Looks like he's got more scars inside than out." Something softer moved at her mouth. Most good ones do. She left. The molasses woke a part of the barn that had been asleep a long time. Ethan ate with his back to the post that bore the least strain. Sugar reached the back of his tongue. The day loosened in ways unrelated to breath. The slope stood empty again. Behind the wall, the pattern waited, patient as rock. Work resumed. Chalk, plumb, measure, map. Pencil nub broke. He sharped it on his boot heel. He logged where boards stayed dead as bone and where they returned a faint, not quite echo. On the envelope, he started a list. Hand auger, longer line, square and level. A lantern that holds its flame. Another shadow crossed the lean-to. A man around 30 stepped in, long built from saddle years. A dark vest that fit like a promise over a shirt scrubbed hard in cold water. Face all corners, a jaw too narrow for gentleness. Mustache trimmed with care that wanted notice. Eyes winterglass blue, warmth withheld. A small, clean half-moon scar lay in the web of thumb and forefinger. The kind knives leave on men who don't brag. Jonas Pike. He touched his brim, polite without kindness. "Neighborly ride by," he said. "Boss asked me to be sure you found your way. Country turns folks around if they don't listen." "I listen," Ethan said, "to the right things." "The name to keep in your ears is Harlan," Jonas said. "He's particular about wells." Rex didn't growl. He stood with weight slightly forward, head level, the air between them pulled tight like a string. Jonas saw the dog exactly as much as he intended to. "Fine animal," Jonas said. "We lost a good one in a brush fire. Shame how quick a wind takes a roof." He dropped the sentence where a man would notice it and smiled, showing a front tooth neatly chipped, a small confession he'd decided to keep. "Enjoy your ride?" Ethan said. "We always do." Jonas touched his brim and left. The light felt cleaner, as if wood had been holding its breath. By late afternoon, chalk lines completed themselves into a square that wanted to be a spiral. They came to rest near where a foreman with pride and symmetry would center the bay. Ethan knelt and rested his hand there, again, a small roll under the skin of the world. Pressure answered by pressure, the ground saying yes to itself. The strap tugged behind his ribs. He answered it at once. Count and hold, count and hold. Rex leaned the familiar weight into his shin. The Vrau, present, set its feet. He boxed the envelope map so eyes wouldn't confuse it with addresses. Labeled it neat. Henderson Barn, interior marks. Probable flow. Verify bearings at first light. The day stacked itself behind him. Small work, right done, making a shape he could trust. Night would bring the sounds men call curses. He meant to sort them. Weather, old lumber, or a living throat below the floor. Dawn, he told Rex. The dog yawned and made a home out of thin air. Ethan banked the coals in a stove he'd coerced back to usefulness, with wire and patience. He checked the brace, the latch, the seams where drafts talked. He bedded down with the folded photograph under his coat, Rex across his boots. The floor kept breathing the quiet that isn't empty. His last thought before sleep wasn't fear, just habit counting, and the habit felt less like armor and more like scaffolding for a house he'd barely begun to raise. The wind turned late, coming back with the scent of weather from the mesas. Ethan stacked his makeshift tools, nail plumb, chalk, twine, and slid his envelope map between two boards so it wouldn't curl. Rex tested the doorway, sneezed once, then settled near his man. He checked the brace, the stove flue, the fixed latch. Small order steadies a long day. He poured coffee into a tin and let the steam argue with the cold. From the duffel, he brought out a canvas-wrapped book, leather, sun-thirsty, and mended. J.R. Miller, Survey Reclamation. N. Wells, 1892-1911, pressed in a stubborn hand. He opened to the middle, where the book liked to live, field marks in a lexicon, triangles for grade, diagonal slashes for bearing, doubled lines for pressure, circles for clay, sand, caliche. In the margins, pencil ghosts, smell iron, don't trust stride, water lies to thirst. A diagram, shallow artesian and basin country, cap intact, tap vertical. Let the earth's patience carry you. Rain arrived like cloth laid over a table, first a darkening, then the quiet pox. Tin began to drum, soft, steady. Rex's ears stayed at half-mast. Ethan felt the strap inside him tighten at the percussion and squared his breath. 4 in, hold, 4 out, hold. He moved the tin cup close so Rex could scent him without lifting his head. The count did its job. A thin slip fell from the journal. Onion skin, penciled faint, Henderson, D.C. Basin, 47. Notes sparse and sure, small artesian beneath outbuilding. Floor code cut to confound thieves. Family threatened by buyer who manages water. A rectangle that matched this barn. A spiral of triangles from sill to center. Darker at the margin. If found by kin, finish honest. Do not sell water to a man who calls wells leverage. Ethan pressed a thumb there until paper pressed back. Blood doesn't always pass land. Sometimes it passes the exact kind of stubborn you need. A gust rubbed the roof. Tin rattled. One loose sheet clapped. A sound too close to the kind that arrives before the sky goes wrong. Rex stood, shook once, and leaned his shoulder into Ethan's shin. Just enough. Count back. I've got the rope. The present came back to its edges. Rain kept time. He traced the diagram again, then ran it with eyes closed. Sill, knee, hip, diagonal right to center. Pressure marks doubling near the middle bay. Artesian wasn't a guess. The hush under the floor at noon hadn't been his head. The earth had been talking in its mathematics. Next page, caliche cap, thin, hand auger enough. Do not open in drought wind. Dust tells men who listen for other men's work. Hide the marks, leave misdirection if you must. Below, angrier, faster. Henderson threatened. Riders with torches, marked back wall code. Pray the reader passes water to town, if I cannot. Ethan set the book to his chest for a breath. The old way of telling the dead you understood them. He compared his chalk map to the sketch. Bearings matched. Within a boot, the spiral landed on the same kind of spot. Work done right twice steadies a man better than talk. He planned morning, confirm bearings, locate the plank at the spiral's end by nail spacing and grain, test the give, then ride for a hand auger, lantern, crow, wedges, hose, canvas. Rex's head lifted, ears to full point. Body turned from companion to instrument. Ethan slipped the journal under his coat, pinched the lantern to a low coin, and moved to the doorway shadow. Rain curtained the yard. Mesquite stood like black nails. A horse walked out of the gray like a thought deciding to matter. The rider sat straight, heavy-shouldered without fat. Dark coat cut right on a man used to being looked at. Narrow brim hat kept water off his eyes. The rest he let the rain claim. Lightning made a courteous stitch on the horizon. In the seam, a clean-shaven face in its 50s, jaw long, mouth tight from control, pale eyes set a little close, cheekbones honest for saddle work, posture trained for desks. Clifford Harlan, the kind of man whose name opens gates faster than hands, kid leather gloves, reins loose because he preferred obedience to be willing, boots still shining where the rain hadn't earned the right to dull them. Slicker fell without a crease. Men like this arrange the world that way. He didn't approach. He measured, borders first, then buildings, then the man who thought he might change how the measuring ends. Steam rose from the horse, silence expensive enough to say, words are for contracts and threats. Behind him, a second outline held back, Jonas Pike by that saw blade brim. Tonight, the shadow kept his job. Ethan didn't step into the light and didn't pretend absence. He stood where a patient look could stitch him in. Rex kept the shoulder contact. No pressure now, just the rope between partners. Harlan's hat dipped, not in courtesy so much as acknowledgement, equal or obstacle. Then horse and man turned in weather quiet, learned from money and control. When the dark had eaten them, Ethan lowered his shoulders the half-inch a man needs for sleep. He brought the lantern up and reopened the journal. He didn't write Harlan's name in the margin. Ink was cheap. Sleep and breath needed banking. He read the last page once more, then tucked the book under his coat for warmth against damp. Rain softened the barn's edges until the world fit a man again. Rex sprawled across Ethan's boots, the soldier's way. Wake at the first wrong sound, not the first right one. In the forgiving dark between thunder and sleep, Ethan let the count come, not to bar fear, but to keep hope from running ahead. Morning would be for proof. Tonight was to learn the weather of a place, and whether Clifford Harlan watched to buy something or to burn it. His last thought thanked the stubbornness that travels in blood for teaching when not to move. The barn kept breathing. Rain kept writing its simple grammar on tin. Under the floor, a patient pressure waited for the right hand to ask the right question. Dawn came clean and sharp, the kind of winter light that turns every nailhead into a star. Ethan warmed his hands around the little stove long enough to feel his fingers again, then checked what the night had not stolen, the chalk spiral on the floor still clear, the envelope map still pinned under a board, the journal dry under his coat. Rex stretched, shook the night off in one economical ripple, and set to a slow, deliberate sniff of the barn's middle bay, as if clocking back into a job. Ethan walked the perimeter once, corners, seams, bracing, then stepped into the spiral center with the care of a man putting his boot onto old ice. He knelt and pressed his palm to the boards. The cold was not dead cold. It carried a faint, patient cool, the kind that belongs to stone and water rather than air. Rex touched his shoulder to Ethan's thigh, and then, without asking, put a paw down at the exact plank where the chalk lines crossed. A beat later, he did it again, claws ticking softly, the closest thing to a pointer finger a working dog allows himself. "All right," Ethan said, "we'll trust the math and the nose." He eased up, slid the pencil behind his ear, and rode into town for the things the list had asked for. The general store sat on the far end of Maine, like a man who had grown old exactly where he intended. Its windows held flour sacks and harness soap, and the stubborn hope of seed packets no one would buy until spring. Thomas Wittman, who owned the place, moved behind the counter with the slowness of a tall man who had learned to keep his back by bending only when it mattered. 60 if a day. He had hair the color of iron filings and a mustache that had lost ambition. The skin of his hands was the worked brown of a saddle horn. His eyes, clear blue, dry at the corners, met the world with an accountant's patience and a neighbor's memory. "Heard the rain found you," he said, voice thin but not weak. "It found the roof anyway." Ethan set a hand auger, a crowbar, 2 hardwood wedges, a roll of canvas, and a length of hose on the counter. "And I'm about to find what's under my floor." Wittman's look flicked to the tools and back. "Expensive curiosity on $10 a land." "Cheaper than thirst in February," Ethan said. Wittman gave the smallest nod, the storekeeper's version of blessing. He rang the sale on a brass register that chimed like a modest church. "You watch yourself," he added. "Clifford Harlan came through before sunup, buying kerosene, and asking who owns Henderson's Story now. I told him the ledger says what it says." He slid a small tin across the counter. "Lantern wick, on the house. A man shouldn't work blind where water's involved." Caleb Hart, the boy sweeping the aisle, freckled, red-haired, the nose of someone who hadn't learned winter yet, paused long enough to say, "Mister, if you hear the ground hum, that's good, my granddad says. Means it. Has a song." Whitman's eyebrow climbed a fraction. "And if it screams," he added dryly, "it's lightning, and you get out of the field." Ethan thanked them both, tipped the brim to Sarah Whitfield across the street as she unlocked the post office. Tall, tidy, wheat-blonde hair catching a thread of sun, and rode back into the thin light with Rex loping alongside, the dog's breath pluming like a small steam engine. Back in the barn, he set the lantern low to make shadows honest and rolled the canvas to the side in case the earth had more to say than he was ready to hear. He took off his coat, folded it with the journal inside, and slid it into a dry corner where the drip could not reach. Then he worked the crowbar between plank and joist at the southwestern corner of the chalked square. The wood complained once, a long old note, and gave. He eased the board up enough to peer into the black seam below. Dirt lay tight and smooth, as if someone had laid it with a trowel yesterday instead of a lifetime ago. He levered up a second board and a third, always replacing each with a wedge so the bay would not sag, always listening for the tiny wrong notes old buildings use to warn men who think they are smarter than gravity. Metal ticked somewhere beneath, the soft, contained ping of iron remembering weather. The sound came too quick and too sharp, and for a moment his chest locked, the strap-pulling breath short. He set his palm to the rim of the opening, squared the count 4 in, hold, 4 out, hold, and felt the numbers bring the room back to size. Rex leaned a shoulder into his shin, not pressure so much as proof. Under the fourth board lay packed soil as dark as coffee. He took the hand auger, fixed the bit, and pressed it into the earth with both palms until it bit. Turn, turn. The old iron rode its spiral with patient teeth. The first shavings came up rust brown, the second damp, the third cooler. An iron smell lifted. The clean coin scent of mineral and rain married long ago. He cleared the hole with a finger and felt the dirt give under the auger's lip with a small sigh. The dog's ears sharpened like arrows. Ethan set the auger aside and brushed with his gloved hand. The soil changed texture under his fingers, from grain to grit to something smooth and cold. He cleared a circle the size of a dinner plate, then the size of a hat crown. The edge that came up was iron, thick and old, with that brown-black scale heavy things grow when they have held their breath under dirt for decades. He widened the clearing with short, careful pushes of the putty knife he'd sharpened against his boot heel. The circle became a square, then a square with rounded corners. Dirt held to the seams like memory. He blew once. A fine cloud lifted and made the lantern's flame blink. He felt for letters and found the first with a fingertip. A capital G raised proud of the plate by a blacksmith who had meant his marks to outlast both man and weather. He brushed to the right and read it in sections, the way you learn a long name from the end of a telegram. Blessing runs deep. He cleared left and found the beginning. God's blessing runs deep. E.M. Henderson, 1847. The year sat there without apology, the way a gravestone sits. The dog made a low, pleased sound that might have been a growl if joy could growl. Ethan pressed his palm to the iron. It was cold as a coin in winter, and yet, beneath that cold, there was the tiniest vibration. Not movement you could measure with your eye, but a softness that belonged to something living on the other side of metal. He lowered his ear close. At first there was only his own breath in the shell of the barn. Then, the longer he let the world be itself, a murmur arranged itself under the plate, the sound water makes when it chooses a narrow throat and keeps faith with pressure. He set the crow under the lip and tested weight. The plate did not move. He cut the dirt farther back, found the corners, eased the wedges, and rolled the canvas into the hole's mouth so that soil would not fall where it didn't belong. Then he leaned and lifted. The first inch came with a noise like a rusty piano remembering a hymn. The second inch came easier. He propped the corner with a wedge, moved, lifted again, guarding his back like a man planning to live with it later. The plate didn't want to leave the bed that had kept it. He said nothing to it, and it said nothing back. They negotiated. At 4 inches, cold air rose through the seam, and with it a smell like wet stone, crushed fine, pure, and mineral, and without rot. Rex sneezed once, twice, a dog's version of laughter. "Easy, partner," Ethan said, though he meant it as much for himself as the iron. He lifted the last inch and rolled the plate onto the canvas mouth down, so any water they woke would not take the barn floor with it. The dark beneath was not bottomless. Lantern light found the edges of a stone throat lined in the old mason work, caliche, and small river rock set in a lime mortar that had outlasted most men in this county. 8 feet down, maybe 10, a black mirror moved without breaking. He turned his head and listened. The sound had a shape now, a narrow tone, quiet, consistent. The kind of music pressure sings when it meets the surface it has been aiming for all its life. He fed the length of hose down until it kissed the water, then put the other end to his lips and drew a cautious pull. The taste came up like a clear bell, cold, sweet with minerals, no mud, no rot. Water that had never seen daylight since the year the plate was hammered. He spat onto the floor, a ritual more than refusal. You do not steal the first sip from a well. You ask it a question, and you listen. He coiled the hose, tied the canvas over the mouth loosely to keep stray straw and curiosity out, and sat back on his heels to let the fact assemble. Henderson had capped a living throat and left a message for anyone honest enough to read. A family had feared fire, and a surveyor with more conscience than time had buried a secret where a patient code could someday lead blood back to it. The journal's penciled hand and these raised letters on iron shook hands across 80 winters. "You kept your word," he said to the plate, to the dead, to the part of himself that had followed scratch marks and dog nose here. Rex lay down with his chin over his front paws and stared into the opening as if it were a gramophone that would begin playing if asked right. Somewhere beyond the corral, a hawk spoke once and was done. Wind combed the grass, and the barn, relieved of the iron's insomnia, seemed to breathe deeper. He wiped the plate clean, where dirt still clung in the name, then brushed the inscription again so his hands would memorize it the way his eyes had. God's blessing runs deep. E.M. Henderson, 1847. He set the plate against the wall, heavy and certain, and pulled the canvas back over the mouth, as a man might cover a sleeping child, loose, respectful, temporary. There would be filings to make with the land office, measurements to take with tools more precise than twine and instinct, choices about how to let a secret become a commons without turning it into a battleground. But that was for later. This moment belonged to discovery, and to the quiet that comes after a hard-earned yes. He banked the lantern low and sat with his back against the post that least wished to fail, the journal open across one knee, the envelope map across the other, the dog warm against his boots. He wrote 5 lines in a field hand that had not forgotten orders. Removed floorboard, center bay, per code spiral, iron plate present. Inscription reads as follows: stone throat line true, static head present. Artesian, probable. Then he closed the book and let the barn settle around him. The wind had changed, the cold had picked up a trickle of moisture, and there was a thin freshness in the air that didn't belong to winter alone. "We found it," he said, and the dog's ear twitched once like a promise. Ethan laid his palm over the canvas one last time and felt that patient, living push, a heartbeat that wasn't his, and yet had decided to share the same room. He smiled, small and private, and stood to put the boards back for the night. The cold held through noon, a bright, brittle kind of winter where sounds travel farther than they mean to. Ethan reset the floorboards loosely over the canvas-covered throat, left the iron plate leaning against the wall with its inscription wiped clean, and chalked a quiet X on the plank he meant to revisit with proper tools. He ate in 3 bites, then walked the fence to see what the night wind had moved. Rex quartered the yard, nose low, tail level, keeping his loose circle like a compass that only points to now. By early afternoon, a dust line stitched itself along the road and resolved into 3 riders. The first sat a tall bay, as if horse and man shared one spine. Coat dark, hat narrow-brimmed, reins held light. Clifford Harlan did not need to be announced. Behind him came 2 men, one thick through the chest, the other drawn thin as a fence wire. They passed the old Henderson gate without hurry, curved to the barn like a pen scratching its period, and pulled up in a spray of grit that hung and glittered. Harlan dismounted with the quiet economy of someone who is paid to learn not to grunt. He wore a dark worsted jacket over a crisp chambray shirt and a slate vest that fit his torso like a decision. Clean-shaven, jaw long, cheekbones a little too fine for the mud he claimed to master. Eyes pale and close-set under the brim, everything about him said he enjoyed control and had the money to practice it. He tugged once at a kid-leather glove as if straightening the day. "Mr. Miller," he said, letting the name land as if he were doing Ethan a courtesy by using it. Clifford Harlan, as if the county didn't already know. The thick-set man swung down next. Burke Dalton stood a head shorter than his boss, but broader by 2. His shoulders had learned their shape under hay bales and winter coats. Early 40s, beard cropped close to hide a twist in his jawbone, where something hard had once decided to stay. His nose had been broken and set with more loyalty than art, lending his face a dependable asymmetry. His eyes were the undecided green of tank water, watchful, not quick. He wore a wool work jacket buffed shiny at the elbows and gloves, with the fingertips darkened from oiling leather. A foreman by posture, a man who knows the names of fences and the moods of windmills. The thin rider followed, unfolding from the saddle with a stiffness that came more from rooms than roads. Silas Crane, by the look and smell of him. Lawyer's bony neatness, bookkeeper's wrists. Late 30s, narrow face, razor mustache drawn like a line under a pair of glasses barely there in the light. His suit had traveled poorly under a slicker and resented the trip. His boots were too clean for the yard. He held a leather folio like a shield and blinked once as dust chose his lashes. Ethan stood easy by the barn mouth, hands outside his pockets, posture squared the way a man squares to weather. "Afternoon," he said. Harlan studied the barn. First, eaves, corners, lean, and then the field beyond, as if measuring acreage by eye and appetite. He brought his gaze back to Ethan last. "You came into a piece of property that has been misunderstood," Harlan said, the words softened with pity's varnish. "I can relieve you of the burden before it becomes one." He nodded to Crane. The attorney opened his folio and, with a pen-lift flourish, slid out a check already written. The paper flashed a pale blue, the bank seal deep and official. $1,000. The zeros looked pleased with themselves. "That should more than square your 10, Mr. Miller," Harlan said. "Leave the dust to men who make a living at it." Rex stepped halfway between Ethan and the men and stood, weight forward, head level, tail still. The dog didn't growl. He simply was, the kind of presence you feel in your shins. Burke's hands went idle at his sides, fingers straightening unconsciously, as men's hands do when dogs read them. Silas Crane pretended not to notice and then remembered to smile with only half his mouth. Ethan's eyes flicked to the check, not for its promise but for its bank stamp. Dry Creek State and Mercantile, signed by a clerk with a name too fine for this county. He let the image sit, then looked at Harlan. "It's a generous square," Ethan said. "What's crooked that needs it?" Harlan's mouth barely moved, the eyes did not. "Water makes land," he said. "We are in a season when the making is thin. I am expanding east. I have rights to graze and build if I can bring reliable head to my herds. There are aquifers, Mr. Miller, and networks of claim. What you bought was a barn roof. What I am offering recognizes the context below it." Crane stepped forward, the pen already half raised. Up close, the lawyer's pupils had the forward lean of a man who reads fine print out of habit and looks for places to tuck new sentences. "We can close today," he said, voice papery and certain. "Quit claim for improvements, indemnity for defects, a modest covenant that you refrain from seeking future rights on adjoining parcels. You get the 1,000. Mr. Harlan assumes liability for any hazards." He smiled with his teeth and not at all with his eyes. "A gentleman's conclusion. Liability for hazards," Ethan repeated, as if tasting how the words sat one behind the other. He slid his palm along Rex's collar, not petting, just counting. The strap behind his ribs tightened the size of a coin, the kind of squeeze that arrives during polite conversation, when a room turns narrower by a degree only the body measures. He counted 4 in, hold, 4 out, hold, and let the world sit back down in its chair. Burke looked past Ethan into the barn. The iron plate leaned against the wall in all its blunt truth. His gaze paused there, and some emotion passed through it that had nothing to do with the job, recognition maybe, or the kind of anger you carry for men who bury things worth saving. "Boss," Burke said softly, just enough that the word reached Harlan without being shared. Harlan did not look away from Ethan. "You found something under your floor," he said. Not a question. "There are old stories about Henderson," Ethan said. "Men tell stories when they're thirsty." Harlan's patience stayed visible, which is a way of showing you have enough of it to lend. I manage water, Mr. Miller. Dry Creek lives by it, whether it admits it or not. My expansion is not vanity. It's provision. Wells must be placed into a system so the town doesn't cannibalize itself at the first hard summer. The Henderson place is the last piece of a map that keeps families solvent and fields green. Crane's pen scratched his folio with an incidental little sigh, the voice of paper persuaded to carry weight. $1,000 solves the winter, Crane said. It buys you comfort and options. It buys you distance from trouble. Rex's ear ticked at the word trouble as if it had a tin edge. Ethan let his gaze slide from Harlan to Burke and take the foreman's measure more fully. The crack in the front tooth hidden by beard, the way he stood with his weight off his left side like a man repairing a knee by avoidance, the eyes that found practical things to look at when talk turned to leverage. He had stood beside such men. They ran the world while other men signed it. What happens if I decline? Ethan asked, keeping his voice level. Harlan's silence grew a layer. Decline implies you were offered a choice, he said. You were, and you are. But the county has a way of discovering encumbrances that make land less hospitable. Lines get disputed. Old documents find new readers. Fences wander. Fires start. The last word slid out like a coin across a counter. It clicked in the air exactly once. For a slice second, the barn narrowed hard. The roof felt closer. The remembered percussion of rain on tin turned to another percussion entirely. Rex pivoted 3 inches and leaned his weight into Ethan's leg, steady as a brace while the man above him counted his square again. 4 in, hold. 4 out, hold. The strap eased to a thread. You're telling the wrong man about fire, Ethan said, voice flat and quiet. I've already been burned down to what I intend to keep. He looked past Harlan to Crane's ready pen, and then back to Burke's hands, which had resumed the subtle work men do when they imagine the thing that can go wrong. Mr. Harlan, he said, you don't want a barn. You want the water under it. You want it because what you already own is thirsty. You want it because a man with the last well writes the story for everybody else. Harlan let the truth sit between them and did not deny it. Men who own too much don't waste energy pretending. $1,000, he said again, with the quiet of a hammer placed, not swung. We could make it 12. Crane's pen added a 0 in the air without touching paper. You can also keep your pride and freeze in February, Crane said, the first edge showing at the rim of his tone. Burke shifted, eyes flicking to the iron plate again, then to Rex, then to the road where a distant rider showed and vanished, violet by the good seat and the hat. He made no sign, his face closed back to its dependable, unreadable setting. Ethan let his hand stay on Rex's collar long enough to feel the dog's pulse meet his. He thought of Sarah's steady ledger, of Whitman's small blessing across the counter, of Caleb's boy's certainty that ground sings before it gives. He thought of Henderson's name, stamped into iron by a man who believed steel could carry a prayer farther than breath. He looked at the check once more, then at the barn's center where the board sat easy over a throat that had waited a century to be asked a decent question. When he spoke, he didn't raise his voice. I'm not selling. Crane's pen paused mid-air, as if it had reached the end of a sentence it could not write. Harlan did not sigh. He folded patience over the moment like a napkin. You believe stubbornness is a virtue, he said. It is until it starves you. Stubbornness is refusing a bad system, Ethan said. What you're running is a ledger with people's futures as your columns. Burke looked away at that. Reflex, not philosophy. Harlan stepped 1 pace closer, boots placing themselves without error in damp dirt. Young men die on principle, he said. Old men live on arrangements. I'm neither, Ethan said. I'm a man standing on what's his. Harlan studied him a final time, the way you study a fence post you don't like, but must admit is set true. This conversation will grow less polite, he said. Next time, I'll bring more men and fewer words. He nodded to Burke. Note the boundaries. To Crane, we'll prepare filings. He turned his bay with the same fine economy with which he had arrived. Burke mounted with the practiced wince of a knee that complains only when work pauses long enough for a man to hear it. Crane took a moment to tuck the check back with something like regret, accountant's hate-wasted paper, then swung up, reins held like a signature. They rode out at a trot that didn't need to look like a retreat because the road ahead of them belonged to their kind by habit. Rex watched until the dust line broke and blew thin. Ethan didn't move for a long count. The barn's light had shifted. The iron plate looked darker where it leaned. He breathed once, deeper, and set his palm on Rex's neck, the coarse guard hairs and warm skin, finding his hand like a tool you mean to keep. We'll mark it with the land office, he said to the dog, which in this place meant to himself. We'll set witnesses. If a man is going to fight over water, he does it with paper first. Rex licked his knuckles once, acknowledgement, acceptance, or just a dog's way of resetting the air. Ethan walked inside, checked the wedges, checked the lantern's fuel, and wrote in the journal the only sentence the moment truly required. Harlan offered $1,000 for Henderson Place. Declined. Intent to register well, public witness required. Then he closed the book and sat a long while with his back to the post, that least wished to fail, the dog pressed along his boot, and the winter light leaning down to read the room with him. Past midnight, the wind died and left the cold to do its neat work. Ethan slept light with Rex across his boots, the journal tucked under his folded coat, and the loosened floorboard set back over the canvas-covered throat. The first wrong thing was a smell. Kerosene twined through straw. Rex's head snapped up. A ribbon of orange crawled along the south wall where no light should be. Flame learned fast. It took webs, splinters, the dry hem of the lean-to. A tin popped. The strap behind Ethan's ribs yanked tight. Heat and sound pushed him toward a past he had worked to leave. Rex bit his sleeve. Tug, release, tug, the old K9 cue that meant move now. With you, Ethan managed, forcing the square count. 4 in, hold, 4 out, hold. The latch stuck in heat. He shouldered it, and the cold rushed in like a cure. Outside, frost flashed to water at their boots. Inside, the barn talked in tongues of fire, breathing through cracks, roaring in rafters. Ethan fought the dead pump. The handle gave grudgingly. The first bucket hissed and vanished in flame. Another pop, pitch maybe, or the same kerosene that had found the wall. He did not say Harlan's name. Fire had appetite enough. Through the slats he saw the iron plate he'd cleaned that morning catch the glow, slide when a failing beam struck the back wall, then clang flat over the loosened boards. Heat bullied the iron's temper. The metal groaned and lifted a fraction on trapped breath from below. Rex pressed hard into Ethan's leg, the kind of shoulder a partner lends when the world tilts. They stamped sparks from the yard grass. The dog ran a smart perimeter, punching out embers and dancing back when they snapped. From town came iron on iron, the store bell. Figures in coats broke the dark. Thomas Whitman, long striding. Sarah Whitfield with hair loosed from its knot, ledger strap across her shoulder. Violet McCall from the east fence, hat down, jaw set. Ezra Doyle the blacksmith arrived short and broad, ash stitched into his hands, hauling pails. Alma Ruiz the midwife came compact and dark-haired, her shawl tight, already counting heads. Deputy Ben Carter followed, square-shouldered in a hastily buttoned coat, badge crooked, eyes awake. "Bucket line," Thomas called, the voice people obey for good reasons. Caleb Hart skidded and pink-faced, sloshing. Ezra read the flame like furnace work. If the ridge goes, the roof follows. He tried the south door and felt heat shove him back. "Hold the yard." Smoke thickened. The pump coughed. Every breath found cinders. Ethan threw and hauled. The count kept its own time. In the gaps he heard it, the iron under the floor making a low animal note. Pressure below, heat above, an argument the ear hated. "Back!" Alma snapped. The ridge brightened like a wrong sunrise, let go at one end, and drooped. A stall wall folded. The plate slid into the sag, caught, then dropped an inch. Something under it pushed up, steady and patient. The hiss that followed wasn't flame's hiss. Cold met hot with purpose. The iron jolted, turned, and the earth shouldered it aside. What rose was white, water thrown into light, a column leaping 20 feet and striking the ridge with a note like a hymn taking its key. It broke into rain across the rafters and fell hard on everything that burned. Fire screamed, then sulked, then lost the argument. Steam rolled and owned the yard. When it thinned, the barn was a wet cavern. The column steadied, no spasm, no stutter, just pressure breathing through stone. Rex barked once in what sounded like laughter. Ethan caught his collar. Both were soaked and shaking between cold and relief. "By heaven," Thomas breathed, hat brim dripping like a second little bell. Ezra rubbed wet soil between thumb and forefinger, smelling it. "Mineral, not iron sour. This'll put weight on cattle and green in fields." Alma's laugh came short and astonished, the sound of someone letting go the worst. Sarah pressed a hand to the ledger strap, as if to keep history from sliding off the page. Violet stepped close to the spray, face ghost-lit, and looked at Ethan as if saying his name might change the fact. "It was there," she said. "It was always there," he answered, voice shaking now from joy, not shock. Neighbors came as if the road had learned to hurry. Baker dusted white, 2 cowhands from the East Ridge, old Mrs. Redmond in house shoes, 3 boys with more courage than sense. Ben Carter scanned the crowd, then the water. "Any dead?" Heads shook. He nodded. "Then we keep folks back and remember what we saw." He eyed 2 fresh hoof prints at the gate pointing out of town, fast, neat, gone. He filed that look without comment. The pillar fell from 20 feet to 15 and held, clean, bright, 10 across, the color of polished tin. Mud went black, then rich. The yard took water the way a thirsty man takes truth, stunned, grateful, unable to pretend it isn't happening. "Witness names," Sarah said, mind already arranging columns. "We'll need a statement." People nodded, suddenly careful with their awe. Violet crouched to Rex and put a palm to his ruff. The dog allowed it, no ceremony. "You saved him," she told the shepherd. Rex leaned a second, then sat at Ethan's boot, neat as a salute. Steam feathered away. The barn exhaled. Night felt less like punishment and more like a room a town could share. Ethan pressed his palm to the dog's neck and finally let the strap behind his ribs go slack. He looked from water to faces, wet, bright, boots sunk in new mud, and chose the pronoun that fit what the night had made. "We have a well," he said. The word did work. It turned spectators into witnesses, and a discovery into a commons. Ben tipped 2 fingers. "Daylight, we put it on paper." Thomas set his hat, uselessly wrung. "Young man," he said, careful, "that's Henderson's?" "Blessing, and you set it free." Ethan breathed deep. Cold, mineral, smoke, dog, people, and nodded. "We'll keep it honest." The column hissed back into steady quiet. Dry Creek stood baptized and blinking, already telling the story out loud. Morning at the well. Steam lifted off the new pool. The white column held steady at shoulder height. The yard smelled of wet ash and clean mineral. Neighbors returned with tin cups and names ready to witness. Rex kept a slow orbit, eyes on Ethan, tail level, present, anchoring. Inspector arrives. A buckboard creaked to the gate. The man in the government coat climbed down with a leather case and a tripod. Inspector Arthur Collins, mid-50s, tall and spare. sun-creased at the cheekbones, wire-rimmed glasses, a nose once broken and honestly set. His voice was flat ground. "Morning. Who's Miller?" Ethan stepped forward. Collins leveled his scope, sent a steel tape toward the basin, and noted Flo with a private nod. Paper first, Sarah Whitfield, tall, wheat blonde, tidy, opened a ledger wrapped in oilcloth. Witness to artesian emergence. Henderson tract sat at the top in neat hand. Signatures trailed under it. Thomas Whitman, the storekeeper, brought the deed book and his safe key on a cord. Sarah passed Collins the provisional deed. Dates and stamps matched. Collins read twice like a man checking joists for rot. He wrote in a brass-bound field book, "Owner, Ethan Miller. Source, artesian, head stable, composition mineral clean." He tasted nothing. He trusted instruments and the blacksmith's nose. The circle of town deputy Ben Carter, square-shouldered, mustache brown, set a rope circle and kept people back from the slick. Ezra Doyle, blacksmith, short and wide, lifted a pinch of grit with a magnet and grunted approval. Alma Ruiz, compact and steady, counted faces as if after a storm, all present. Violet McCall stood in front rank, coat dark with last night's steam, eyes exact. Harlan's entrance hoofbeats from the south. Clifford Harlan, polished again. Silas Crane, narrow and legal in a sulking suit. Burke Dalton, foreman's bulk, dust that doesn't wash. The water spoke first, a fact that didn't need adjectives. "We've corresponded," Harlan said. "We have," Collins replied, still writing. Arguments and habits, Crane opened his folio. Prior use, implied easements, customary diversion along Harlan Creek. Collins closed the field book and met them. A thin scar split one eyebrow. Custom is habit. Law is statute. Water runs with the land unless expressly reserved. He turned Thomas's pages and Sarah's entries. No reservation, no lien. Crane's pen hesitated. Harlan's jaw set. Burke looked past Ethan to the iron plate leaned against the steaming barn and swallowed a private memory. Testimony Ben's pencil waited. Mrs. Redmond, tiny and precise. Henderson came to me shaking, partners with a price at his door. Owen Lyle, cowhand with a split ear. I rode fence for Harlan. We tapped upstream. A neighbor's trough died. Boss called it efficient. Ezra. Kerosene was bought that wasn't needed. Alma. We stopped a town fire with help we didn't light. Violet, even voice. Threats make poor contracts. Jonas and Burke Jonas Pike hovered at the edge, saw blade brim, winter glass eyes. He started to speak. Burke shook his head once, mercy from a practical man. Jonas closed his mouth and studied mesquite instead. Finding a fact, Collins put his glasses back on like a man turning a page. I am not the court, he said. I am the instrument by which fact reaches one. Facts. The well sits on Miller's land. The deed is good. The flow is present. Witnesses are many. Allegations of arson go to the sheriff. He let the word arson land. Ben wrote it down. By authority of the Territorial Land Office, water and appurtenant rights run with title held by Ethan Miller. Any diversion, tampering, or intimidation counts as interference with a lawful claim. I'll post notice at the courthouse by evening and lodge a temporary injunction while I measure and report. Deputy, keep a perimeter. No drinking at the throat. No stock until we sleeve a trench. Push back and answer. Harlan's Polish thinned. You'll regret this, Inspector. And you, Mr. Miller, you don't know the cost of being right. Ethan looked at the column, at Sarah's ledger, at Rex sitting neat at his boot. I know the cost of being owned. It's higher. A town leans in. The mood shifted from watching to building. Men pointed where to trench. Women counted pails and rope. Thomas offered his wagon for gravel. Crane gathered papers like a man saving face. Jonas rode off first, quiet. Burke stayed a beat with his hat in hand. "You'll need posts," he said, not looking up. "Sycamore holds in wet ground. Cut it green." Then he followed the boss. He suddenly looked older than. Leaving without taking. For the first time in a long time, Harlan left a yard empty-handed. The dust behind him didn't look like ownership. The Whitewater shouldered on. Sarah blotted the last signature. Violet's glance mixed pride with relief. Ezra's jaw loosened. Alma finally smiled. Collins shook Ethan's hand. "Keep a ledger," he said. "Share without surrender. Paper before shouting." Rex pressed his shoulder into Ethan's shin. Here and now, settled. In the clean light, justice looked less like thunder and more like names written plainly on a page. 6 months later, morning came green and orderly. The basin wore water like good work. Quiet, everywhere, enough. From the timber collar at the well, a broad-shouldered pour slid into a stone raceway and split into measured canals. Each gate had a number, a name, a little paint mark to show last week's turn. Cottonwood saplings kept shade with leaves that whispered agreement. Ethan walked the line at first light. Back easy. Hat down. Listening more than counting. He checked gate number 3, Whitman, where a thin blade of water stitched clean furrows. Gate number 6, Ruiz, fed a kitchen plot that had learned to be bold. Gate number 9, Doyle, stood true, pushing a square of hay Ezra had set for his mules. Rex trotted a pace ahead, tail level, shoulder touching Ethan's shin whenever the pass tried to pull him sideways. The dog's muzzle had taken a thread of gray. His eyes stayed steady brown, the color of a promise kept. The town learned new habits. On the courthouse door, 4 plain pages hung beneath bright nail heads. Dry Creek Water Share and Stewardship Compact. Sarah Whitfield drafted it in longhand that didn't shake. Inspector Collins had initialed the margins. 22 families had signed in inks that would outlast weather. The compact said rotation, not privilege. It required a measuring board at every lateral. It made hoarding a lie you told yourself first. They formed a water board because paper still needs hands. May Ellison, the school teacher, mid-30s, wheat-brown hair, chalk-smudged fingers, took the chair no one wanted and thus deserved it. Straight spine by principle, not pride. "We speak in turns," she said. "We write what we do what we wrote." Violet McCall sat as secretary with a pencil tucked behind her ear, like a small second spine. Ben Carter kept order without noise. Ezra Doyle led repairs with a blacksmith's patience. Set it true, fix it less. Thomas Whitman kept a spare copy of the log behind his peppermints. Harvest answered. Alfalfa cut sweet and clean. Corn stood honest at the shoulder. Beans climbed wire like gratitude. On fair day, tables lined Main Street under sheets that used to be curtains. Mrs. Redmond's pies didn't last to noon. Owen Lyle won the horseshoe toss and handed the feed prize to a widow without being asked twice. Caleb Hart finished the sack race on his face, popped up laughing, and saluted Rex as if the dog had judged him. Collins returned once with dust on his boots and a level he seemed to trust as much as people. He checked the boards, the books, then the pour, and nodded once, the fieldman's blessing. Fact holds. Court had accepted his report. The injunction had ripened into a recorded right. Sarah slipped him a loaf because that is how towns say more than thank you. Not everything softened. July tested them when João Mendes, compact, olive-skinned, hair cropped close, pride tidy as his rose, missed his slot because his boy spiked a fever. He opened gate number 11 after sundown to keep beans from crisping. At dawn, Ellis Gardner, narrow man, narrow mouth, found his field shy by a finger and went loud about theft. Old debts woke and sniffed the air. Ethan arrived with Rex in the ledger. He didn't raise his voice. "We'll solve it in order." May stood beside him, pencil hovering like a held breath. "João?" she asked. "My fault," Juon said, before anyone could bruise the word. "I'll work the penalty." The compact's claws fit like a good joint. 3 hours of ditch work, and the next surplus inched downline. Ellis looked like he'd wanted a fight and been handed labor instead. He took the shovel. By noon, the lateral ran truer than it had. Juon's boy slept cooler. Ellis learned that fairness stings less when you share the sting. Sleep came easier for Ethan. Most nights, he slept through. On the others, he walked the cottonwood path with Rex and let the pour on stone write steadiness inside his ribs. The square breath had become less a rescue than a habit, as natural as banking a stove. When a door banged wrong or the word fire snagged a breath, Rex slid his shoulder against Ethan's shin and set the present back to size. At summer's end, they did a small thing that meant more than its size. Caleb painted a cedar sign in careful, blocky letters. Rex's Well. No one objected. On the timber frame, Sarah read a short resolution Violet had typed neat and clean. The Henderson Artesian, henceforth Rex's Well. May its water serve the many. May its keepers be equal to their duty. A line Sarah had snuck into the end made people smile. A friend with 4 legs taught us to stop running from what saves us. Rex cocked his head at the laughter, then thumped his tail once, solemn as a judge. Lives resorted. Burke Dalton left Harlan's orbit within a week of the hearing and hired on with Calvin Ellison, May's brother, to run a modest hay outfit whose ledger balanced because both men preferred truth to speed. Silas Crane filed 2 motions that arrived late and left early. Jonas Pike drifted a while, then took nights at the rail spur and discovered he liked guarding things better than taking them. Harlan's name stayed like a stain you can't see until rain, but his horses didn't return. The board met on Thursdays at dusk. Alma timed speakers with a kitchen clock that chimed without apology. Violet read minutes that didn't waste nouns. Ben posted rulings on the courthouse door. Thomas's wagon hauled gravel to shore a bank. Ezra taught 3 boys to set a gate without curses. May closed each meeting the same way. Share without surrender, paper before shouting. It became a town joke, and then, better, a town rule. One evening, a blue heron came down and stood in the new pond like a piece of sky deciding to rest. Caleb tried to sneak and failed. The bird lifted, circled once, and settled on the far bank, as if it had accepted the town on probation. Violet leaned on the rail beside Ethan. "We look like a place again," she said. "We always were," he answered. "We just had to prove it to ourselves." He thought of a dusty afternoon, $10, and a barn that hit a living throat. He thought of iron letters hammered by a dead man who had trusted future hands. He touched the old scar along his forearm and felt, easily and without surprise, no threat in the memory. Rex nosed his palm and sat, ears testing the slow news of evening. The dog looked over the people he had adopted, measured, approved, settled. Ethan laughed once, quiet. "All right," he said to the shepherd, to the town, to the day. "We'll keep it honest." The cottonwoods whispered. The canal shone. And Dry Creek, learning to call to each other before calling for help, did the patient work of staying saved. In the end, Dry Creek didn't just find water. It rediscovered itself. From $10 and a loyal dog, a weary veteran learned to stand steady, and a town learned to hold one another instead of holding control. Rex's Well reminds us that miracles rarely shout. Sometimes they're a patient spring beneath old boards, a shoulder from a shepherd dog, a name written in a commons ledger. In everyday life, each of us has a well to open, an apology offered, a gate shared, a neighbor heard before the shouting. Let Ethan's courage and Rex's quiet faithfulness nudge you to do one small thing for your community today. If this story moved you, please share it. Tell us in the comments what well you want to uncover next, and subscribe so we can keep telling hope-forward tales. May God bless you in your home, peace like water, provision like rain, and strength enough to pass it on.